Hi, good morning. Is anyone confused by this, why she put it up? I'll explain it, I promise. So I'm really excited to be here, and I recognize a couple faces, actually a good-sized chunk of faces from this workshop I did in New York City, which Gina and a few others attended, so I'm happy to be back with friends. So I was thinking about what to talk about today and how to sort of set it up. Also recognizing that this is towards the end of your time here, and I want to leave you with some big ideas to go back and think about. So just a little bit of background. I'm actually not an educator. I mean, I sort of am an accidental educator. I'm trained as an architect, and I went to school for architecture. I practiced architecture. I'm obsessed with architecture. I love building. I love the scale of architecture. I love the idea that I can build something that's bigger than myself. And so to make a 26-year-long story very short, I practiced architecture and then hated it. Like, just woke up one morning and was like, this feels really, really dishonest, like very disconnected from all the things that I really love about architecture, which is building, which is working with people, which is providing shelter, things that are meaningful and important in the world to myself and to others. It stopped feeling like problem solving. It felt like, let's argue about doorknobs, like just not at all, not interesting in a design sense at all. And you know, a critique of the architectural profession is a whole other presentation. But the result of that frustration that I felt around age 26 was that I wanted to start a nonprofit and try to figure out how to make my design practice and my architectural practice way more meaningful than what it had become. And so the result of that was this. So I founded Project H Design in 2008. We just celebrated our 8th birthday. And I had no idea what I was doing at the time, like literally none. I walked into the Secretary of State's office on January 8th, 2008, with my articles of incorporation, and was like, I'm here to start a nonprofit, and did not have a business plan, had no money, but it was the act of starting and saying, like, I'm going to create a legal entity to which I am now responsible, and now I have to figure out how to do the work that I've been wanting to do. I don't have any excuses anymore. So since then, Project H has grown into many different forms, but at the heart of it, it has become a lot about using design and building and architecture as a lens for public education, to reimagine its classrooms, to reimagine what learning looks like, to reimagine how teachers practice their practice, and just to sort of like shift the conversation about what are we really measuring, what do we really want our students to leave school being able to do. And I love that design and building allows us to do that like anything's possible. And that's, to me, that's really what's exciting about being in an educational space. So I'll talk about how I ended up in the educational space, but this is sort of the crux of what Project H does. I should also say, just as a disclaimer to what I'm going to talk about, that project-based learning and design thinking and maker spaces and all that, there is this like surge in the use of and adaptation of those practices, and I'm interested in them. However, I also think at the heart of all those things, there's just like this deep sense of creativity that we all have in us, that our students have in them, that there is a creative practice that is really at like the foundation bedrock level of all those things, of project-based learning, of design thinking, et cetera. Those are just protocols. Like, I think those are easy to learn. What's not easy to learn and to nurture is creativity, and that takes practice and commitment and being uncomfortable. And so the stories I'm going to tell are really rooted in that fundamental assumption that we're all creative, we all want to be creative, and we can all spend our lives being creative, like in our classrooms and outside of our classrooms. That may look like project-based learning, it might look like design thinking, it might look like something completely different, but we are all creative people, and that's, I hope, why we're in the room, and also what we should be bringing to our classrooms. So I have, I think, like 4 or 5 little nuggets of quasi-wisdom, or maybe I should say lessons that I have personally learned over the past 8 years with regard to this type of work. So the first is, someone told me like 5 years ago, oh, Emily, you're so fearless. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm scared of everything. The point is that I still do it, right? So I think we should all be afraid to fail and say, like, I'm afraid to fall on my face, but then be brave and just go and start. Start before you're ready. We talked about this in our teacher workshop a few weeks ago, that you have to start before you're ready. If you just keep preparing and preparing and preparing, you're probably never going to start. So it's okay and actually helpful to be afraid, to say, like, these are the things that terrify me, but then way more important to just say, but whatever, I'm still going to do it. So I have this story. I'm sure some of you have heard or seen the film, or at least heard little snippets of this story, so I'll try to tell it relatively quickly. But for those of you who haven't, so in 2009, a year into the life of Project H, when I still didn't know what I was doing, I got a call from a superintendent from Bertie County, North Carolina, middle of nowhere. County of like 18,000 people. The county seat has 2,000 people. It's tiny, right? Eastern part of the state, very flat, very hot, lots of tobacco. So anyway, I got an email from this guy. This is Dr. Chip Sullinger. He was the superintendent of the school district at the time. And he said, "Hi, I saw your work in Dwell magazine." I'm like, what? What superintendent subscribes to Dwell magazine in the rural South? But okay. He's like, I was hired by the state to take over this district that was falling apart. They want me to fix it. I've tried everything. I don't know what else to do. Can you please come and do something? And I was like, sure. I'm not sure what we have to offer, but yeah, absolutely. So that was the start of a long working relationship with Dr. Sullinger, where we did all kinds of stuff. We rebuilt some of their spaces. We physically built new computer labs, a weight room for the football team, this graphic design campaign. So we just started working with him on various design projects. And then we realized about a year and a half in that it felt very disingenuous to be like flying to North Carolina and acting like an architect and building something and then leaving, which we were saying was for the benefit of students, but we were still these like parachute creative people, and it felt like icky, right? So what we proposed to Dr. Sullinger was that we wanted to teach. We wanted to move there and teach and run a design build program where students could come to our class as a part of their daily class schedule and learn the fundamentals of design, construction, trades, architecture, creativity, and actually construct things for their community, like big, full-on, full-scale public architecture, which in a town of 2,000 where like nothing new ever gets built is like a crazy idea to begin with, let alone saying we're gonna do it with high school students. So as I'm saying this to him, I'm thinking like, I have no idea if we can pull this off. No clue. It's terrifying. I don't want to move to North Carolina. Like, why am I saying this? This is a horrible idea. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Wait, it'll come back. Wait for it? Okay. Oh, technology. Give me 1 sec. The dongle is loose. All right. And we're back. Okay. Where was I? Terrified to move to North Carolina. So anyway, I moved to North Carolina. And for some reason, this like very brave man said, of course you can teach a high school class, and of course you can have that deserted barn, and of course you can have high school students and teach them whatever you want. So there's a lot of bravery or naivete going on by a lot of people. So we started this program called Studio H. We partnered with the community college, so we had a group of 13 students who were all in this early college track, and they were forced to be in our class, important detail. So there was some convincing to do. But anyway, they were in our class for a year, and over the course of the year, they earned 13 college credits. They earned all their elective credits, and we were their only, for most of them, we were their only human being teachers. The rest of the day they spent online. So to go from like screen, like PE, they were taking PE online. And then and then coming to our class and building stuff. And so anyway, this was their lives for a year and our lives. Over the course of that year, we had students walking in, and as I mentioned, some of them not wanting to be there. They were enrolled in our program because they were the only students in this early college program, and that's where Dr. Sullinger said this program would live. So I had a lot of students walk in and be like, why am I in a barn? Why is there like stuff everywhere, tools that I don't know how to use? Where are the desks? And we had to answer all those questions and really try to justify design as a meaningful process to them. And so one of the first projects we had them do was the design of a chicken coop. And on the very first day I said, can someone come up here and draw a chicken coop? And I'm sure you can guess what it looked like. It was a square with a roof like this, which is what everyone draws when you say draw a piece of architecture or a house. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Now you don't get to draw squares or triangles. Like, now what does it look like? So over the course of many days of like pushing the boundaries of what a chicken coop could look like, we got some models that looked like this. So this was inspired by a precedent study that we assigned to a student that was the Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome. And so there's this practice in architectural education called the precedent study, where you look at a piece of architecture and like dissect it down to its tiniest details, like how does it stand up? What's it made out of? Where is it sitting on a site? What culture or context is it sitting in, et cetera. So this student was assigned the geodesic dome. And his models for the chicken coop were inspired by this idea that you can take really simple geometry and turn it into something incredibly complex. And so he made all these models. These are all flat pieces of cardboard that he just scored and bent. And there were like 30 more. These are just a few of them. So we said to him, this is amazing. I promise you we can turn this into a chicken coop. So we had to figure out, based on his idea of using these flat pieces and then scoring them and geometrically like being able to bend them up into something. We were able to figure it out. It was incredibly difficult. We used this funky like plywood sheet metal scenario where the hinges could both bend but then also become fixed. So this is, again, this is coming from like a model on a 17-year-old student's desk. But the point was we had to prove it to them that any idea you put in front of us and in front of your classmates, it is buildable. This is like the moment to prove that anything is possible to them. Because at this point, they're still very skeptical as to why they're there. So we built this giant roof structure thing that had to be both flexible and fixed, hoisted it up. We taught a little intro to structural MIG welding to create the structure to hold it up. They weatherized the roof. And then this is the final chicken coop, which was an homage to Buckminster Fuller. They named it Koopas Maximus. And this is the team that built it. And there were two others, actually. You can kind of see one of them in the background. That was another one, these two cubes with this like twisty DNA type structure connecting them. So this is the first project we did with these students. And as I said, like this was really just a way to show them you are here for a reason, and these are the things that you're capable of. And anything you bring to this class, not only will we entertain it, but we will help you make it real. So we built chicken architecture. And then we had made this promise to the district and to the town and to the mayor that this group of students, led by us, that we would build a piece of architecture for the town. Again, terrified, like, why am I making this promise? I have no idea if I can pull this off. But in the back of my head, I also know, like, I am not going to fail at this. There's zero option for failure. This would be a good point to tell you also that before this class started, like literally 3 weeks before the semester started, the superintendent, Dr. Sullinger, was like run out of town by a very, very angry and irrational school board. That's also a whole other presentation. All you need to know is that he was run out of town before the school year started, and so by the time we were working with these students, we had no salary. We were there because the students wanted us to be there, and we had 5 people who actively did not want us to be there. Everyone else did, the families, the mayor, like there was a whole lot of support for our program, but we had this one force really working against us. So when we started this project to build this giant piece of architecture, my fear kicks back in, and I'm like, well, what if we can't pull it off? And then these 5 people get to say, I told you so. Like, I cannot let that happen. We talked to the students, but we were very transparent with them. Like, what do we want to build that is going to be beneficial to our town, that's going to be exciting for us, that's going to take into account all of these social and economic and racial and environmental things that are going on in this county. And so the thing that they brought up, that many other people did as well, is that the town did not have a farmer's market, which, you know, in most parts of New York and certainly in California, like the farmer's market is sort of just a staple. It's not anything all that unexpected. But in rural Eastern North Carolina, like very controversial and like ballsy thing to propose, apparently. The closest farmer's market is 80 miles away. It's a total food desert. There's one grocery store that sells like 4 things. It's awful. And so when we put out this idea of doing a farmer's market, there were a lot of people that were excited about it for very different reasons. You had farmers who had kale they wanted to sell. You have students who want a place to work on the weekend. You have community members who have nowhere else to gather, physically gather. There's no bar. There's no cafe. There's no community center. Like, there's nothing. You have the mayor and the Chamber of Commerce who want a source of like small-scale economic stimulus. So there's a lot of people excited by this idea, our students being at the top of that list. So similar to the chicken coops, you know, we went through the whole research and prototyping process. Every student came up with an idea, with a proposal for the physical design of the space. The mayor and the town council donated a piece of land and said, you can put it right there. This is one of the town councilmen. He's like one of the big, you could call him a tycoon of Bertie County. And he's talking with my student, Karan, about his Google SketchUp model for the farmer's market. And every time I look at this photo, I kind of just took it without thinking about it, and then I went back and looked at it and realized, like, those are 2 people that never would have met if it hadn't been for this project. And that is the power of project-based learning on steroids. Like, doing things that are big and real and that multiple people can engage with, that conversation was able to happen. So we have 13 designs, and we can only build 1 farmer's market. So there was this whole very like emotional and like cyclical process of trying to merge some of them and pull them apart, eventually to like cull them down into one final farmer's market, which looks something like this. So not to get like all nerdy, architecturally nerdy on you, but there's a lot of beautiful things about this, even though it's very simple. So we took this precedent. There was this structure that I've never seen anywhere else in Bertie County. It has 8 bays where you roll in trailers filled with peanuts. And there are these really simple structures with 8 trailer bays. I've only ever seen them in Bertie County. And so this was inspired kind of by that. There's 8 bays here, but instead of trailers for peanuts, there's a farmer's market stall. There's a double height ceiling so that ventilation, and then you also get this like billboard to the town that you can use. You can't really see it on the model, but the base of it's actually not rectangular. It kicks out at this 7-degree angle, which is this like very esoteric reference to Eero Saarinen. Anyway, these are all things that came out of the students' research. So I'm obsessed with this design, but I also didn't design it. So I love that my students, because we assigned them Eero Saarinen, and they were like, oh, why does he does all this stuff with 7-degree angles? Well, that's where that comes from. So every single detail of this building can be traced back to something that they researched or discovered or like wanted to bring into their proposed design. Okay, so now we actually have to build the thing. School gets out in June, and we're all like exhausted from teaching and learning, and it's June, and everyone wants to be on a jet ski. But no, we are on a job site, and it's 100 degrees outside, and we're digging holes and pouring concrete. And I realized, though, that I looked up one day, and I was so tired, I threw my back out like 4 times, and my students were not fazed at all. They were like, this is our project. Like, we may not be in school anymore, but this is what we signed up for, or were forced into, and then eventually were convinced that it was worthwhile, I should say. So we dug all these foundation footers. We built all of the skeletal trusses, which this is like one of my favorite little stories. So I discovered that North Carolina labor law, you cannot have an 18-year-old, a minor, on a job site operating a power tool. So we had to build this entire structure without power tools. We had one kid that turned 18 on like July 2nd, and he was a chop saw guy. But all of these we had to pre-fabricate in our shop during the school year disassemble them. They're made up of 27 pieces each, and because of that 7-degree angle, every truss is different. So it was all coated, and it was bananas. But anyway, we had to prefabricate them, move them to the site, reassemble them with mallets, and then raise them into the sky and bolt them down. Another reason I love rural North Carolina is because some random guy who you kind of know will drop off a machine like this with the keys and say, have fun. So that's, yeah, I'm like, oh, I guess we need to learn how to use this thing. So again, like so many terrifying moments, and then we just had to figure them out, even though we were totally unprepared. That being said, you know, there are things that we had to be incredibly prepared about. Like, we had to engineer this building, and luckily we knew how to do that, but we also had to show our students how to do that as we were doing it. While we were building this, there was, I don't know if you remember there was that like 5-point-something earthquake. This is the summer of 2010. That was while we were building this. I remember sitting like on this very joist, like, what is going on? We're in North Carolina. I left California and there's earthquakes here, like, what's going on? There was that, there was a flood, and there was an F4 tornado, all during the construction of this thing. So huge engineering feat, and those are things that we could not fail on. So we put up the siding. This is all happening over the course of the summer. And then the building was finished at the end of the summer and opened to the public shortly after. The farmers market itself as an enterprise also did not exist. So we had to build the structure and then also like start the farmers market, go and recruit farmers to actually come and sell. It was like a, if you build it, they won't necessarily come. You have to go and get them to come. So this is also an exercise in social entrepreneurship for students. Like, you can build this gorgeous thing, but if you don't have the mayor and 20 farmers and whoever else there on the first day at the opening ceremony, like, it doesn't matter. None of it matters. So these are some of my students at the opening. And this is Karan in the striped shirt, again, who was the one talking to the town council member. And he like took the mic away from the mayor and started talking. And he just, I mean, I was bawling, of course, at this point. But he made a really like poignant point that at the beginning of the year, he was one of the ones who was like, why am I in this dirty barn? And by the end, he said out loud to the mayor and everyone that was there that, you know, he's a 17-year-old. And prior to that year, pretty much everyone had told him, like, you know, you're not going to go to college, so just go do these things. And now, not only, he actually just graduated from NC State. He went to college, and he built this structure. And he said, like, I had no idea. I never thought we were going to pull this off. Like, Emily, I never thought we were going to pull this off, but I'm glad that we did. So he's saying this out loud, and he said, you know, I want to be able to come back here with my kids someday and tell them I built this. And I was like, that is exactly why I knew we could pull this off, because there are kids like that who want to be able to say, I did this thing that matters, and I did it for my hometown as a part of my education, and in 10 years it's still going to matter. So I want to just show, I think some of you have seen the film, but I love the trailer, mostly because I love seeing their faces, because they're such characters. But this is the trailer for If You Build It, which is about this particular project. Bertie County is a prime example in the demise of rural America.
I'm not leaving because I want to leave. I'm leaving because there's nothing to keep me here.
There's not a whole lot of opportunities for our kids here.
I mean, school, I hate it. My dad hated it. My granddaddy hated it. I'm carrying on a tradition.
We have kids coming through that door any minute. What if you could bring back shop class, but orient the projects around things that the community needed?
So here's the challenge.
We have 1 full year to build a community project.
Is this what we're gonna be doing all year? Give me a 0. You gotta be out your mind.
All right, let's get to work.
It's not a typical class. We don't have a desk.
It's crazy.
What I hope to see in 16 weeks is that little model full size.
We're making something for the town of Windsor, so we have to make it right.
We're racing the clock.
Throw that stuff away. There's nails sticking up. All I'm asking is that you do a halfway decent job.
So at the end of his little pep talk,
The pressure's on now.
our offered salaries have been taken off the table.
Bertie County has never paid him a dime.
We're at our absolute limits.
I'm not having this discussion.
Everything just fell apart.
Yes, it does have to be part of that.
We just decided that something had to give.
It's bigger than the students. It's bigger than their education. At this point, it's the towns.
They're trying to teach us how to look outside the box.
Why? Why is something the way it is?
Make something better out of everything.
Are the things you're doing making a difference in anyone's lives?
I think it's critical that people rally around this thing.
I just want these kids to be excited about coming to school every day.
It's just amazing.
You always need to keep putting ideas together to make a better one.
I've never been a part of something so big.
Breakthrough moments happen so rarely that half the time you think you're just doing a lousy job as a teacher. But when it does happen, I mean, it just floors you.
The farmer's market is the beginning.
To stand here and look around, it's just amazing. It really was a blessing. I love those guys.
I'm so proud of them.
This is something that really can transform lives.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and it happened to us.
Available on Netflix and iTunes. So if you haven't seen it, it's a really beautiful story. I mean, it's about the students and the sort of like arc that they go through. So I encourage you to watch it. Which leads me to my next nugget of wisdom, that this type of work in particular, you have to take advantage of inertia and build off of the things that have gone well. So following this farmers market project, we stayed there for one more year. And the students that we had in the second year, we said, you know, what do you want to do? What do you want to build? I wanted to build an animal shelter because there were all these stray dogs wandering into my yard from the hunters, and then they go to kill shelters. It's awful. So I was like, can we please build an animal shelter? And they weren't interested in that. They said, you know, the farmers market was such a huge success. Like, we want to keep building farmers markets. And I was like, well, okay, but we did that. And they're like, yeah, but it's a big county, and we need more than just this one hub in the county seat. So this is what they proposed, and it was actually really amazing. They wanted to build these tiny little, like 100-square-foot farm stands that were just kind of sprinkled around the county that you could just set up and sell whatever anytime you want. The color scheme ended up being the same as the graphics from the farmers market, so you sort of understood it as a system. So this is one. This is another one that they did. So one of these was built by all boys, and one of these was built by all girls. Anyone want to guess who built this one? This was the boys. It was all curvy and voluptuous, and the girls was all rational and right angles. So I'm not going to make any assumptions about that, but anyway. So yeah, it was a lesson for me that you know, you don't always have to say like, let's go do something bananas and, you know, start from scratch. That the students were the ones that taught me this lesson. Like, we just did something successful and great, and we can and should build off of that. So it's now 2016. The farmers market is still up and running. It has like 50-something vendors now. It's created 4 new businesses and 15 new jobs, which is more than Domino's Pizza when they came to town. So hugely successful. And as I mentioned, and I'm happy to talk more about the students individually, but most of them did end up going to college. Most of them just graduated last year. One of them just became a father. I still talk to them. Really amazing kids, and like kids that come from families where college was never in the conversation. And not that college is the only marker either. I mean, there are definitely students who stayed in the community, and one of them is working for a big farm that now sells at the farmers market, and he's part of the management team. So they all have, I'm pretty sure that they have all gotten something out of this project that I can tie directly back to this project, and that they're practicing in their lives and careers now. So that's really exciting. So build off of your successes, and maybe most importantly, and maybe more importantly than the successes, is to build off of your failures. So I don't consider what we did in North Carolina to be a failure, But I do think that there are lessons that I've learned, and we ended up leaving after that second year of teaching for a whole host of reasons. That's in my other presentation. And the biggest reason was just that we, after 3 years of being there and without our biggest advocate, despite the support that we had from the town and from the families, the school board still didn't want us to be there. And I was really sick of banging my head against a wall trying to convince 5 people that just had hate in their blood. So we left, and what we left behind was sort of like piecemeal and not ideal. I would have loved to have said, let's find a way to keep this alive, but it just didn't happen. And that was a really tough pill to swallow. Like, I was really, really conflicted about that. So I was like trying to think of how to frame it in my mind, like how can I make this into a good thing? And so we ended up being recruited by this charter school in Berkeley, California, to come and bring the program there. And I was like, no, I don't want to go to Berkeley. Like, I'm from the Bay Area. Like, do I really want to? And I don't know. It's so different from Berkeley County. I wasn't convinced that it belonged in an urban charter school. But going back to the first one of being terrified and just doing it, that's what we did. I was like, okay, well, let's prove it. If we can do it on this end of the spectrum, let's prove we can do it on the other end of the spectrum. And so that's what we did. So we brought the program to this charter school. It's called Realm Charter School in Berkeley. It's the only charter school in Berkeley. It's founded on a project-based learning, creativity-driven curriculum. And when we moved there, the director said, this program's so great, but you can't offer it just at the high school level. It has to be at the middle school level also. And I was like, oh God, 8th graders with power tools, that sounds horrible. Like, 6th graders are fine because they're still cute, but then 8th graders, they're like not cute anymore. They're just like demons. Not really, I love them, but if anyone has an 8th grader at home, maybe you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Something about that particular, I don't know. Anyway, so I was like, all right, fine, we'll do it. I'm terrified, but we'll do it. Really terrified of 8th graders, but we'll do it. So one of the first projects we did with the 8th graders, and I'll show some of the high school projects as well, but this is the lesson I learned from working with 8th graders, that curiosity trumps passion, that it is far more important, not just with 8th graders, but I think in life and with all students. I think it's more important to be asking really, really good questions than to be trying to seek one very specific answer. And so the project that taught me this, and the 8th graders who taught me this is 3 years ago now. So I had this group of 8th graders, same thing. I said, what do you want to build? And by this time, we have like 270 students in this program, now 13 to 275. And so I have 2 additional teachers working with me. And so as a team, we said to the students, the 8th graders, what do you want to build? And being in a newish charter school, they did not have a school library. And there was a space that was allocated as the library, but it didn't exist yet. And so they said, well, we really want a library. I was like, great, that's amazing. I'm so happy you still like books. Like, that's fabulous. So that became our project. This is the public library. So this is the first research trip we went on. We went to the local public library, and I asked them, kind of like a precedent study, like, how are books arranged? How many books per square foot? What is the circulation pattern? When you walk in, is it public or private space? How do they deal with sound? And all these different things. So after this initial visit, they decided that this is boring, that they did not want their library to look like this, where you walk in, you look for your little Dewey Decimal thing, you get your book, and you leave. They decided that was like super lame. So I'm like, okay, fine, if that's great, if that's lame, but then what is not lame? They're like, well, we really want a library that doesn't feel like a library, that is a place where you can go to discover things, instead of it just being a place of reference, right? They wanted a library that felt like a wonderland, like you could go in and not know what you were looking for and just be, transfixed by like lots of different things. They also wanted a Starbucks in the corner, which I vetoed. But they wanted it to feel like a place that was comfortable and about discovery. So we started just playing with, like, I asked them, like, what does that mean spatially? What does discovery look like architecturally? So there were all these tiny little models, like, how do you display books? Like, what does the furniture look like? What's the flow of the room? This is just the shell of the room that was allocated for the library. It was up to them to space plan it. So many models, many ideas. And then eventually they came up with this idea, which I loved. I was pretty floored at the concept of this. There are 108 eighth graders and one library. So a little harder than the 13 students down to one farmer's market. And so what they proposed is like, okay, maybe we don't design the whole library. Maybe we design one building block that we can use, like a glorified Lego, basically, that we can make many, many things out of. So if one year we need all shelves, we can make all shelves. If one year we need like just big table open workspace, then we can make that. And I thought that was brilliant. I'm like, that's fabulous. So what they came up with was this X-shaped shelf that interlocks together. It's CNC cut. Some of them have a convex face and some of them have a concave face. So when they're put together, they make this like wavelength front. So the other way they pitched this to me, I wasn't sold at first, and they were like, well, Miss Emily, we're learning algebra in math right now, and X is the unknown, and so this could be like the X space where we go to learn the things we don't know. And I was like, sold, you're like, great, I love it, put it on a t-shirt, that's great. So this was the design for the library, and again, it was like such a poetic thing for them to think, like, it doesn't need to be something fixed. What we really want is something that can change with us, that we can continue to discover. So all those X's can be a bench/shelf. They can be tables. They can be shelves that run the full length of the wall. This was a day where we just like filled the wall with them, and then invited the 6th and 7th graders to come in and just like experience it as a place of reading. It can be an exhibition space with tables, or it can be built out with like framed fixed shelves. So these are all of the different iterations that have gone into the space since then. This is one of the shelves up close. So this is still a work in progress. On one hand, I hate this project because it feels unfinished to me. Like I go in there, I still go in there, and I'm like, this is not what it looked like last week, you know? So that bothers me. Like the architect in me hates that. But the lesson that I learned from this, really, it is about curiosity, that they wanted to create the conditions in which they could continue to ask questions and continue to shape their own environment. That mattered far more to them than having some fixed, perfect thing. And so I've tried to remember that, and going into the next projects, that like, what are the questions that we're asking our students, and then what does that allow them to keep asking? And I think this idea of, like, the farmer's market is a very fixed thing, right? But there's also this element to design that is more sort of like nebulous and flexible, and that's important also, that we need to create spaces for students to build things, but then also to continue to manipulate and ask questions. Okay, and then the following year, so we still had the high school program, and the following year, this is last year actually, I asked them the same question, what do we want to build? And the answer, after many, many conversations and debates, was that we wanted to build 2 microhouses, tiny homes on trailers, which I'm sure some of you have seen, that all the beautiful, like, pimped out Dwell magazine, like really beautiful tiny homes. It's like a thing now. So I really like this idea of housing, that we could talk about housing in a very personal way, like everyone knows what their home feels like, but then in a much larger sense, like housing with a capital H, that's an economic question, that's an urban planning question, it's an environmental question, it's definitely a social question. There's a lot in there. So this was the project where I made it my mission. I was like, I'm gonna teach every single subject through the lens of housing. And I totally believe this. And so when I get into conversations with teachers about like standards, like what do I do about standards? I'm like, that's the easy part. Like, I think that's the easy part. And I know I'm like saying that kind of flippantly, and I know it's not easy. But I do think that if you're doing projects in the real world, and ideally real world projects that have some benefit to other people, you can teach anything through it. You can teach anything and everything. So doing things for others in the real world teaches us everything we need to know. So for the purposes of this project, you know, we're building a house, so there's sort of the obvious things, like who's gonna live in it? Who are they as people? What socioeconomic or race do they bring to the story? What history does that demographic bring to the story, et cetera. So there's a whole social science side to it. Then there's also the math and science, like how do we get this thing to stand up? What types of geometry are, I mean, back to the 7-degree angle, right, from the farmer's market. Geometry is an obvious connection. Physics, natural science, what wood are we gonna source? Are we gonna source the FSC green lumber that costs 2 times as much, or are we gonna try to find something local? Are we gonna scavenge things? What does that mean environmentally? So lots of different entry points. We decided that we would build 2, and they would be mirror images of each other. One would be donated to a homeless shelter that actually uses this like village of tiny homes to house homeless individuals on a transitional basis from like 6 to 9 months. And then the other we would auction off, which, that was the slide that Gina put up. It's on eBay, yay. So we wanted to build 2 and give 1 away and then sell the other one. So this is very similar, the process was very similar to the farmer's market, that we did a lot of precedent studies. We asked them to make dozens and dozens of models, and then dozens and dozens more, and to cut their models in half, ask each other what was working, combine things, take them apart. This is like the most fun part of the process, I think. And also having to talk about your work. So anytime you're doing a project, especially if it's public, there's this element of like critique and presentation that most students, I'm not sure in your experience, but most students are like, I'm not talking about it in front of the class. But that's really where all of the collaboration and critique happens. So there was a whole like training we did on how to be in a critique, how to talk about your work, and then also give feedback on other people's work. Then we had to figure out how to build this thing. So here's our math and science lessons. Not only math and science, but also like workflow, employment, contracting, job site etiquette type things. Like we have 80 students in 4 class periods that rotate in on the hour. So how am I supposed to have a construction site where I have a new crew every hour? So we came up with this like step-by-step framing scheme, and we practiced it. Like we would do these drills in the classroom, like step 1, go, and then they'd lay it out, and then there would be like a timer. So this was all like super scripted. But again, like this is project management 101, and so they went through this process. And then we got to the site and started building them. This is actually just on the site of the school. But also thinking about our client all along the way. So we know we're gonna sell one, we don't know who's gonna buy it, but we do know that one of them is being designed for a homeless person who we do not know personally yet, but we know enough about the organization and the type of people that live there currently that we can make some assumptions about what they may need. So we were making decisions about the design based on that. And then putting the framing plan together. And then, again, back to my love of architecture. So this is the Raise the Wall day, which is always my favorite day. So here's 9 students, and they had to raise these walls together. And this is like why I love architecture so much, because none of them could have done this individually. And all of these kids are great kids, but some of them have serious beef with each other. But if one of them is holding one end of a wall and the other is holding the other end of the wall, like you better leave that at the door and raise this wall and not drop it on the other kid's foot. So there's this like deep sense of trust that is just assumed. Like when we are here and when we're putting these walls vertical, I don't want to hear your social whatever gossipy crap. Like get it done. So that's also like a beautiful thing about building is there's like a deep trust that's required in the other person. So this is the framed, one of the framed ones. And then we got into this whole long debate. So this is also what I love about doing real world projects, that there's a budget, right? Like we had a very specific budget. It was $5,000 per house, and it was grant money that we had raised. And so we were getting very, very close to our budget limit right as we were starting to think about siding. And I had wanted to use this really beautiful siding, and became clear we couldn't afford it. And so the students were like, well, Miss Emily, we could use pallet wood. And I was like, I hate pallet wood. Have you ever worked with it? It's like evil. It'll give you splinters. We'll all end up with tetanus. It'll be horrible. And they're like, no, we want to try. So we had a student who donated, whose father works in a warehouse, and donated like 200 pallets. And they spent what felt like a month just taking pallets apart. If anyone's tried to do this, it's a nightmare. And they're all different. Like, you could take apart 20 pallets and have nothing that's the same, right? So they took these pallets apart, like systematically cut them, planed them, sealed them, and we ended up using that as our siding. So this is the final home. And the other one, so there's a photo of the two of them, but they're kind of like mirror images of each other, like little Siamese twins. So the other one is the opposite, and when they're smushed up against each other, they make that sort of iconic house shape that I was making fun of earlier with the house and the, and then they come apart. They're like little, remember those BFF heart necklaces from like the 90s, like that. So there's a lot of, it's a very simple form, but as I mentioned, like we were designing this for a person, and there's this whole social science component to architecture that was so important. And they thought really, really long and hard. There's no toilet. We weren't allowed to have a toilet or a kitchen because the shared facilities at the the transitional facility, they're like, we can't have your house be like the mansion house. Like they have to, so we weren't able to put those things in the home. So it's just a bed, some storage. It's wired for electrical. It has 4 solar panels, and that's about it. And so here's the two homes next to each other with all the kids that built it. So I could go into great, great detail about all of the specific standards and core subject content that went into making this a reality. But the biggest lesson for me in this one was that the "but what about standards" question is really not, that bothers me because I don't think it's that hard. And I think that there are really beautiful projects that are meaningful in the real world that allow us to teach core subjects in very, very real ways. I have total faith that these students have a much better understanding of geometry now than they did after having taken their geometry class. And I may not have like drilled equations into their head, but they know how to make sure a building is square using a 3, 4, 5 triangle like nothing. And that's actually a skill you may use. So I'm really interested in finding projects that students can do where you're kind of like slipping the core content in the back door, like, oh, I'm glad you designed it that way. Let's talk about 3, 4, 5 triangles. So it also doesn't feel like you're beating them over the head with it, right? So these projects are really interesting to me, and I would love to talk to any of you who have big project ideas and how to be really deliberate about working core content into those projects. Okay, and then the last project I want to share, which is a little bit more personal. This has been a long time coming for me to discover this lesson. But I think I don't know if people would agree with this, but I've certainly felt like from the first day I stepped into the classroom, there was this kind of like, I wasn't allowed to be incredibly vulnerable. Like I wasn't able to walk in and be like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like that's not what you want your teacher to say. I think a lot of teachers check a piece of themselves at the door and walk into their classroom, and we feel like we have to be the experts and the purveyors of wisdom, and I've found that to not be true. I think that students really just want to know that you're human, and a lot of that comes from being vulnerable enough to bring your own story into your classroom. And so the way that this has played out for me is, so I grew up in a small town in Northern California that was like 99.9% white, and I'm mixed race. My mother's Chinese, my father's French, and I spent the majority of my childhood like wondering why I was the only non-white kid. And fine, like I never really felt like a victim in that at all, but I did feel a great sense of like difference in the majority of my childhood. And I was also the oldest of 2 younger sisters, was a big nerd, loved building stuff, total tomboy, and did not feel like there were spaces for me, aside from the soccer field, where that was okay. Like to wander into the garage and be like, Dad, teach me how to use that. No, it's like not really a space. You don't go in there, right? So it took me a long time to pinpoint exactly what that was in my own childhood, but to make a long story short, I think there's something very special about creating spaces specifically for girls to be little badasses and to do all of those things that people in one way or another have maybe said or implied that they shouldn't do. And so that's a very politically charged statement that I just made, and as a nonprofit, I feel conflicted saying it, but that is a part of my story. And after 5 years of Project H, I felt like that was worth saying out loud. Like, I want there to be more spaces for girls to do these things, just for girls. And so this is Kaya. She's one of our first campers. I created this camp for young girls ages 9 to 12 called Camp H. And they get to do really amazing things. This is a birdhouse that she made. This is Amber learning how to use a gigantic miter saw. So, the point is to create a space where there is access to tools that you would not otherwise have access to as a 10-year-old girl, and then to work towards actually mastering the use of those tools and applying those tools to really exciting projects. So here's some of the other birdhouses that they made. These are all 9 and 10-year-olds. My favorite thing to do with these young girls, which I remember thinking as a younger version of myself, like I want to learn how to do something superhuman, like weld. And so this is Joanne. She was actually visiting from Japan and didn't speak English. I'm like, how do I explain welding to a 9-year-old girl who doesn't speak English? So this is a big challenge, but there is something superhuman about welding. Like, you're fusing metal together. It's crazy, right? And you're 10 years old, and you're wearing a pink fleece, and like all of this doesn't quite add up, right? This is also the location of this welding table. Like, to the right is the school district parking lot. And so I was having like the superintendent and like other people walk by like, what the hell are you doing? But I love that. Like, that's kind of the point. There should be this spectacle of like, what is going on? Something about that doesn't look right. So this is Leslie learning how to weld. But then there's also, so one of the things I've thought about in relationship to CTE in particular is that there are skills, and then there are like the reasons that we should be using those skills, or the things that we apply those skills to. And I'm really interested in the application of those skills. And so I can teach girls how to weld all day long, but I also want them to learn how to weld so that they know how to make meaning in the world. And so these are symbols. I asked them to design a steel symbol that represented their family name. So they had to research, like, what does their name mean, and then try to figure out graphically how to represent that. You got only 4 pieces. They were in a very specific shape. And so these are some of the symbols that they came up with. And they all have like a really cute, meaningful story about their name. Some of them didn't know what their names meant. So there's like the act of welding, fine. I can teach you the science of why a welder works. But more importantly, I want you, 10-year-old girl, to have a reason and like a personal purpose and meaning for why that tool matters. I also want them to have a sense of, for lack of a better word, like sisterhood, that you can do something alone and you can do it well and you can do it meaningfully, but you can also do it in a group of other girls or other folks, and it can be that much more meaningful. So this was on a day where we finished up early, and all these girls were like, well, can we weld? I'm like, well, we only have 45 minutes, I don't know. And then I was like, sure, fine, go. Like this girl, Erica, she's wearing the white, second to the right. She is a phenomenal, like, better welder than I am, I think. And I was like, Erica, you're in charge. Take your team out there. You can make whatever you want. I'll be out there in 45 minutes. And this is what they made. It's a little hard to see because of the angle, but this is just flat stock steel. It's a sign. It reads fearless. And it's up in our classroom now. So that's just what they did, the group of them, which is so much better than what you can do alone. So not only can we do things together, but we can do things together for other people as well. So one of our main partners is the Women's Domestic Violence Shelter that's like three blocks away. So we went to them 2 summers ago and said, we are a group of 10-year-old girls, plus me, and we know how to do these 10 things. Like, what do you need? And they said, oh my God, we need a bookshelf, we need a table, they rattled off like 10 things. And they said, great, we can build them for you. So this is a bookshelf, which may look familiar. We borrowed some X's from the library. We did a masonry unit. We learned how to mix concrete precisely and with craft, and we built this concrete top coffee table. And then, so this little girl, Amber, on the left, who was the same one in the beginning on the miter saw, she actually lives with her mother in the women's shelter, and she came to the camp. And she said, you know, I live in the residential side, and like there's not that many kids there, and like they can't give out the address for obvious reasons. So she's like, it's kind of lonely there, and there's nowhere to play. So she said she wanted to build a playhouse. And so this is the playhouse that they built for the backyard of the Women's Center. So you can do things as a 10-year-old girl that people tell you you can't do. Even better, you can do them with other 10-year-old girls. And even better, you can do those things to give back to a bigger community. And we can just get together and make really cool stuff because we want to. So this is like the thesis week where I basically say, like, you've been through the boot camp, you know what all this stuff is, like come in, whatever you want to build, I'm fine with it, go. And so there were like a lot of nightstands, there was a skateboard. This thing in the front with the sort of crisscrossy thing was a garden tool organizer. The suitcase thing is a Lego organizer. So this is just purely like from start to finish, an idea they had to execution. And then similarly a skateboard studio that we did with laser etching and basic carpentry. And then we learned how to skateboard, because I still suck at it, but it was very fun. And then so lastly, you know, this idea that we can bring our own stories, like pretty much every element of this program I can trace back to something that I wanted to do as a girl. And I'm not saying that selfishly, like it's all about me. I'm saying that because I really think that the things that we all individually are invested in, like if something's meaningful to us as an educator, as a teacher, we bring a different sense of fire to the work, and the students see that, and they echo that back. So I don't think we should shy away from the things that feel personal to us just because we are teachers and supposed to be, you know, the leaders and, you know, agnostic to certain things. Like those things matter, and students, I think, really respond to that when you walk in and say, you know, here's something that I know, that I'm interested in, that I've experienced, and that makes me think about these things. Okay, so just in closing, since I have a group of teachers here, I want to say that, to go back to this initial idea of fear, so Gina sort of mentioned this briefly in my introduction. We started this workshop for teachers called Unprofessional Development, because I know so many teachers who are like, oh my God, PD sucks. And I'm like, I know, a lot of it does, but a lot of it doesn't. But we wanted to create a space for teachers to really, like, to not beat them over the heads with things like standards and whatever, and like just to create a space where teachers could be creative, like to practice the act of creativity without a lot of detail about here's your PBL worksheet, here's your design thinking packet. Like, let's just be creative and try to shift our minds, and then that will play out in so many different ways. One of the things we started with in the first workshop was to ask people, what is the thing that you haven't done? Like, what are you afraid to do and that you haven't done, and why haven't you done it? So we got some really beautiful responses. I haven't made a change in my career because I'm afraid I'm not good enough and comfortable is easier. I haven't done anything about starting a business because I'm afraid no one will want my jewelry, right? So some of these things are personal, some of them are professional, but a lot of fear. Like, a lot of people are really afraid to start things. I'm sure there are people in this room who are like, I really want to do that thing, but what if it sucks? I think saying it out loud to each other and just like acknowledging it, and then saying, like, I am afraid of it, but I'm still going to do it is really powerful. We also asked teachers to do this speed dating type scenario where they had to talk to each other about various things and be both vulnerable and also non-judgmental. And then we learned knots, so they had to learn these two very difficult knots and practice them over and over and over and over again. And some teachers were like, I cannot do this. Like, I'm stuck. I don't want to do it anymore. And then we also did this design challenge. This is from the Browning School in New York. Some people were at this workshop. This is an IKEA bag challenge. They had 40 minutes to design a garment for the end of the world using 2 IKEA bags. And everyone had a different constraint. So some of them, do you remember what your constraint was? What was it? Yeah, they got no scissors. Were they taken away from you? Yeah, we took away their scissors. What was yours, Gene?
You have 2 bags, but you only have 1 bag.
1 bag? Yeah. One was like, you have to make everything out of triangles. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. But the biggest takeaway that I observed in leading these workshops, and what a number of teachers said, is that all these things that these teachers were doing, like getting stuck and frustrated, being afraid to start, having to practice something over and over again when they didn't want to, or like have to problem solve given like a really big constraint, is that a lot of teachers said this, like, I felt like my students. Like, I felt like my students feel every single day. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of the point. I think, so this is my biggest point of learning, is that all the things that we ask our students to do, to fail, to be creative, to write one more draft, to be uncomfortable, to figure it out, like those are all things that we have to be willing to do ourselves and to model for them. And I think there's like, a lot of this conversation about project-based learning and maker spaces and creativity is really rooted in the same things we're asking our students to do, to try things many, many times, to fail. So that's my last thought, is that we all in this room are educators, but we also have to be lifelong learners and students ourselves. And not just for the empathy of understanding what our students are going through, except for, I mean, that's a very big part of it, but also that's how students learn. If you model the bravery and the creativity and the iteration and the prototyping that you're asking of them, they will show that back to you. So I believe so deeply in this, and I think that we all are like thirsty for learning. That's probably all why we're all here as well. So I encourage all of you to just like maybe say out loud the thing that you're scared to do to someone here, and then ask yourself, like, what would it really take to do that, and to put yourself in a position of learning and take the first step to try to do that thing. So thank you very much. Thanks.